All right, so now we're looking at the front drive shaft, and what I'm doing to get this undone is I have my 14 mil wrench in the back on the nut, and then for the front of the bolt, I'm going to take the biggest ratchet I have, 14 mil as well, and I'm using this as leverage to hold it in place and then breaking it loose. And there, it's loose. So I did that for all of them, used the bell housing as the leverage point. And just like that, these four are out. Actually, I'll just let this hang. It can stay right here. So that's perfect. And then the next thing I need to do is drain the oil and then disconnect. There's a vacuum line and an electrical connector. And then from there, I just have to disconnect the bottom control arm so that I can then pop these axle shafts out. Ooh, more mosquitoes. The things I do for this truck, I'm getting eaten alive by these damn mosquitoes. The hell is that? All right, so all I'm doing is get rid of some skid plates. I'm gonna set this here to the side and get the other one. So the second one's all 12 mil, but of course I need an extension. And then there's number 2.
From here, you're going to need to pop out your axle shafts, and don't be afraid to get in there with a pry bar. You can get in behind the dust shield and pry on it. It should pop out, and then you can take that dust shield off, or you can tap it back in the round if you really messed it up. But if you're careful, it should stay pretty straight.
Okay, so the one thing that I forgot to mention about the wires on this, there's the harness comes down and connects into the one that I disconnected. Further up, there's a bracket that's on top of this clamshell. So what I did was I took that off as well. So the harness here, and now it's just hanging. And that was done so that when this comes out, it doesn't pull at that. The only thing that I can't get is the breather hose. So I'm gonna try and lower this down slowly and then disconnect the breather. But what we need to do to get this out, we have the third brace here, and then the first and second braces up front. So this is a 12 millimeter Allen. I had to go to Harbor Freight and get one of those. So I already loosened that. And then there's 2 17 millimeter bolts that go on top and bottom of this. The top one, I had to take a wrench and from this angle come in and unscrew it. The other one, that's exposed. That one will be easy to get. So I'm getting that bolt right now. And then that takes care of this bracket in the back. Next, I just have to take out these 2 bolts, and then I can pull this entire thing out. So what I'm gonna do is try and, as best I can, use a floor jack and lower this down slowly, keep it on the floor jack, and then that way it's not gonna pull anything. Here's the hoping. You saw how much of a struggle it was to get the other one in, so this is gonna take some finesse. All right, so I just found out there's a 19 millimeter nut on top of this through bolt. So that one's out. And then it'll be the same for the other side, but this time around, we'll have no supports. So I'm gonna try and do this. Yeah, as you can see, it's already shaking. So I'm gonna go on this other side here. Let's try and lower this down. All right, it's loose. So what I gotta do is just make sure nothing goes awry. Jack it up. Okay, that's good. Maybe more. Okay, that's good. All right, so what I did is I took out that support. Now, if I lower this down slow, there's nothing there holding it, so just got to be careful coming back down with it. So let's go down a little bit. It's going, don't touch. Okay, stop. I gotta get this breather out. I don't know how. It's still in there. Okay, plan of attack for taking the front differential apart. Right here is the gear set. So what I need to do is get the stub shaft out, this housing, and then these mounts. So this is the ADD here, and there's 4 bolts, 12mm bolts. But what I want to try and do is keep that intact because it already has gasket around it. So what I want to do is I'm going to take these 4 bolts here out of the stub shaft and see if I can knock this loose. That way I don't have to take that apart. And then really what I need, there's still components on this, they'll just stay in place. Like this is the bracket for the electrical connections. And this is one of the mounts, so I just need to take that mount off. This mount, fairly simple. It's just going to be 3 19mm bolts, and you just take those 3 out. There's that. So I set this aside. Additionally, while I'm over here, you want to retain your drain plug and filler plug. As I had mentioned previously, I'm going to reuse these little gaskets on here and hope that those are going to be good for 500 miles before I change that fluid out. They are a 10mm Allen head. So, another one down here. I'm going to take these out and set those aside so I don't forget to put those in the new clamshell. So that one still has my gasket on it. There's my gasket. Okay. Now, there's 3 or 4 bolts here. So what these, take these off, you need an E-Torx bit. And this is an E16. So they're pretty tight. I had to get a massive wrench, or I'm sorry, ratchet. I'll cut that. Mark. So I had to get a massive ratchet to use my torque wrench and broke these free. So maybe needed a big breaker bar. Couldn't really fit an impact on there, so I just stepped on these supports and broke them loose, and that worked fairly well. Now, this thing is heavy, so I'd be careful. Yeah, see, it's too cumbersome to fit in there, so you're gonna just have to do these by hand. And then this one, I'd be careful, set this back down gently. And just do this one on the side. So there's the bolts. Now in a perfect world, you just smack this with a hammer and it should fall apart. And there you have it. So I got my stub shaft in here. If you saw there, all I did was I smacked this support just to break this gasket on here. And this whole thing is still intact. So what I need to do is clean this surface up and get my RTV and grab my new clamshell. One thing I didn't do is I got to take this side gear out, so I'm going to try and pry it out. So there's a washer in here that goes around, and on the parts website it says do not reuse, so I'm going to go and see if I can find one online, get that ordered, and then press that in.
Now what we need to do, we're going to put our side bearing retainer in here in such a way that it's located with these tangs, as you see in this photo here. Locate it here, and then you'll drive it down. Once that's set, you'll grab the stub shaft and you'll locate that. You just rotate it a bit until it engages, and then you'll drive that down as well. Once the sound pitch changes, you know it's down far enough. And then you'll just paint this side with RTV. I'm using gear oil resistant RTV. Let that set up, and then you'll drop your housing down next.
All right, now that I've got, there's a lip around here, so I'm going to slide that in, and then that RTV will get pressed all around this lip and should seal that surface. I gotta be quick though, because there's oil that's gonna try and flow out. So I'll match these up. Hopefully I don't get any oil on the RTV. So I'm gonna tilt this. Now, before I mate these surfaces, probably gonna have to wiggle this around, get it to engage like that. Now I just want to take my bolts, finger tighten. I will caution you here, you just want to be careful and not over tighten these bolts, one and then another. You want to evenly do it so that it has consistent clamping force, so you don't get this thing turned in there and nick that surface, that lip that I was showing you. But by finger tightening these, you at least know it's lined up where it needs to be. That way you don't break your RTV seal later if it returned. Alright, so my gasket maker has tacked up. It's been about an hour. Now I need to torque these E-torques to 81 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to make sure that they're all decently tight and then go around and torque them down. Alright, that's the last of the torques, the E-torques. So now I have these 3 bolts over here, and what I'm going to do, put some red Loctite on them, and those get torqued to 137 foot-pounds. So I'm going to get these situated, and then lastly, I'm going to torque the drain plug. That's 48 foot-pounds. So after that's torqued, this thing's ready to go back on the truck. And what I need to do is wait for some daylight and go out there, and we'll start putting this thing back together.
What we're looking at here is a breather hose and the vacuum connections that mount onto the housing. So I want to point out that's right on top of the power steering rack. And then if we look at the actual bracket itself, you see that that connects back in. And for the time being, I'm just going to put it back up in there so then I can go grab it once the housing is mounted.
What I've done, connected those 2 hoses that I just spoke of. I tucked them away up in here, and then I'm just going to go and grab them whenever I get this differential situated. So now I'm going to get the diff on the jack and try and position it in here as best I can. So let me get out of the way on that. Alright, so I'm working with the support through bolts here that go through the frame, and I'm putting a little bit of Loctite on here because why not? And make sure that the puck is on top of these supports. That gets sandwiched with a large washer. There's a small washer on the bolt, and then there's a flange on the nut that goes on the top side. These are going to get torqued to 101 foot-pounds, so I get my wrench, and these look like 19 millimeter. So the nut is 19 millimeter, and then the bolt itself is most likely 21. All right, word to the wise. Use your jack it up taller than it needs to be, and then you can get your third support in here. And the torque specs on this, so the hex bolt, the nut, that's going to be 64 foot-pounds, and then the two bolts that go into the actual case are going to be 80. Now, you're going to have to say a prayer for this top bolt because you're going to have to do it with a wrench. And I don't know how I'm getting that to 80. I'm just going to really use some force with my wrench. But the bottom you can torque no problem. So we get this jack down, get these all torqued up, and then that should be it for getting it in here on its own support. So yeah, now that's in there, I just gotta fill it with fluid. Get these axle shafts in here. All right, next up, now that I've got all of this torqued down, I'm gonna put this connector back in its place. Karina, can you get the dielectric grease for me, please? All I did was I took out, there's a small plastic clip that goes through a bracket, and then the connector itself has teeth that slide on that same bracket to hold it in place. It snaps in, and then what I need to do is just connect this electrical connector and the vacuum line right here on the front of this ADD. All right, vacuum line is in. A little bit of grease on this connector. All right, that's in there. Beautiful. All right, so now we're going to get these axle shafts back in. All right.
Once you get the housing bolted up, you just have to do the reverse out and get these axle shafts to seat inside the carrier. On the end of the axle house or axle shaft, you'll find that there's a ring that acts like a spring, and it falls into a recession inside the carrier to hold these axle shafts in place. So what you want to first do is get them on the same plane. Once they are jacked up so that you have a parallel with the ground axle shaft, you then need to get that spring to compress enough to get into that groove, and then it pops back out into place. What's difficult about it is if you try and smack on the outside of the axle shaft all the way at the hub, the CVs compress and sort of dampen that blow that you give it. So you can either do it that way and just keep hitting at it until you feel it pop into place, or you can take pry bars and try and do the reverse out of what you did to get it out of the axle housing. So instead of prying on the lip on the inside, you try and pry the opposite way to push the house or the meat of the CV back towards the case, and that might give you the best success of getting them to pop in on both sides. So you want to jack it up level and then get it to pop in. Once that happens, you've got primarily your front axle back together. The final stage to get your truck back on the road, you want to get your lower ball joints torqued to spec and you get your tires back on. If you didn't disconnect anything else, don't forget to fill up your front differential. And really, this job is pretty easy. It just takes a few specialty tools and then the ability to get a jack under your car to lower that front diff down. If you go with the East Coast Gear Supply already built clamshell, as I had done here, I thought it was very simple. It's just being paying close attention to detail, taking it apart so you don't miss something like those vacuum lines, and being careful with your CVs. Other than that, this was probably one of the easier installs on the truck. So if you have questions about this, reach out. I'll be honest, as I'm saying this currently, I shot this video almost a year and a half ago. So if there's something that didn't make sense, let me know and I can go back through it and see what I was thinking as I look at the video. But other than that, hopefully this helps. And as always, have fun doing it and let me know if I can do anything. One last thing to mention, this truck does so much better with these gears. It just has a lot more response. Not that it has more torque and power from the install, but I will say that it seems to be much easier on the truck doing this modification to it. It just drives much better around town for as heavy as the truck is. So I highly recommend, if you're thinking about it, definitely pull the trigger on this upgrade.